Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of the Project Liberal podcast. My name's Josh Eckel. I'm the president of Project Liberal and the co-founder. I'm joined today by Max Marty from our steering committee. Hello, Max.
Hey there.
And today we are joined by somebody who I'm a huge fan of, Shoshana Weissmann. She's the digital director and fellow at R Street Institute. She is an expert on occupational licensing, social media regulatory policy, Section 230. She's written for the Wall Street Journal, USA Today. She's a huge fan of the Snapchat hot dog. She has the best Twitter account in the world. Shoshana, thank you for taking time to chat with us.
I love that. I want that intro every time I speak. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, so for the sake of giving our audience some context, we wanted to talk about three major things. If we get some time, we may jump into a couple additional topics on the fringes here. But the first thing we wanted to talk about was social media regulation and Section 230. This is being talked about a lot due to a lot of the conflict around Twitter and all these other kind of things going on related to social media misinformation. We wanted to talk about AI regulation and then hopefully finish it off with some talk about occupational licensing and some of the changes that we can make to our regulatory system in order to make it easier for people to get ahead. But I wanted to open up with something that I know you've spent a lot of time talking about, and it's something that's a little bit niche that I don't think a lot of people understand, and that is Section 230. I was hoping I could maybe tee you up, Shoshana, to talk about what the hell is Section 230 and why it's an important rule, like what it does and why it's important.
For sure. So I love Section 230. A lot of people are mad at it. But to me, it's just a personal liability thing. It's saying, hey, you're responsible for your own stuff, which is already the case. Other people aren't responsible for your stuff. That's the long and short of it. There's carve-outs here and there. But really, it just says that platforms aren't responsible for your speech. It's funny, when I joined R Street, I didn't totally get it. But one day it hit me and I'm like, oh, I really want to work on this. I really, really get this and why it's important. And I think the case that kind of preempted it is really illustrative of why it matters so much. So I'm going to say a bunch of stuff that sounds fake, but it's totally real. You can Google it. So the Wolf of Wall Street sued a guy on an old platform called Prodigy because he had said that the Wolf of Wall Street, Stratton Oakmont, like they're scammers, they're fake, they're just defrauding people. And Stratton Oakmont also sued the platform where they posted it. And then a judge came in and said, well, you say your platform's family friendly, and this one piece of content on your whole platform isn't family friendly, and you moderate, so you should have known about this content. And as we know, like even back then, there's lots and lots of content. No one knows what's true or what isn't true. I mean, lies. I mean, who knows if the guy knew for sure, but it sounds like the guy knew for sure that they were frauds. And obviously we know they turned it out to be frauds, but it's amazing to me that Prodigy lost in court because some random person was a whistleblower. So without Section 230, platforms wouldn't host whistleblowers. They wouldn't host any controversial content that anyone would be likely to sue over. Doctors could sue over bad reviews saying the person was making it up and it's fake. And even if you just get the lawsuit, you don't want to be a part of that. Bad reviews in general, but I think for doctors, it's, stuff like that. It's pretty dangerous to be able to have that taken down easily. And because they don't want to sue a lot of people, it's easier to sue the platform. And a lot of people are mad at it because they think it protects the right to post misinformation and disinformation. Well, lies are protected by the First Amendment. A lot of people don't know that. Most reasons people are mad at Section 230, they're really mad at the First Amendment. There's exceptions, but overall it's really a First Amendment kind of extra insurance thing, showing that people can't drag you into court for people doing free speech too much on your platform. And without it, we just wouldn't have whistleblowers, the Me Too movement. So much of the way the internet exists today, it wouldn't exist the same way. Maybe sometimes for the better, but I think mostly for the worse. So I love Section 230. People are mad at it because they don't like free speech for the most part. There's exceptions, but overall, that's a big reason.
So I guess one of my understanding was, and it sounds like this is probably accurate, like Section 230 as a rule is really what underpins the ability for social media companies to operate as they exist today, like from a fundamental perspective. Yeah. So when this made national news, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not fully read up on this, but I believe that it was, 2018 when Trump, I want to say, was talking about removing it? Is that an accurate statement? There was a whole debate about this a couple of years ago. Okay. I am remembering that correctly, right?
Yeah, I think, people have kind of gone after it for a long time. Like Senator Blumenthal has always hated Section 230, but it became a really, really big thing around, I think, 2015, 2016, and then it just kept growing. And the past couple of years, it's died down a little bit, but before, I'd say like 2017 through like 2021 were the big years for like it being really chic to hate Section 230. And I was very unpopular for defending it, but to me, it's like it's a personal liability thing, making sure that you're responsible for your own words and no one else is responsible for those words. And you can have free speech online, from the comment section in your mom's blog to when you retweet something that is false and ends up being defamatory. Well, there's no way you would know that some random guy on Twitter is lying, though some random guy on Twitter is often lying.
Yeah, yeah. No, and a lot of the times when people talk about fighting misinformation, you've got to frame it in the context of who's the arbiter of what is true and what is not, right? And and really, I think the best way to do that is have an open market of debate and discussion where kind of ideas go to war, rather than saying, a centralized authority is the thing that decides that. I am curious because I know Max wanted to talk a bit about the specific situation around Twitter, because obviously the conversation about misinformation is nothing new, but there's a whole renewed conversation around it related to Twitter. But before I got to that and hand it off to Max, I wanted to just kind of maybe pick your brain on where it started. Like, what was the origin of it? Like, how did this whole concept even come into play?
Of Section 230 being created?
Yeah, specifically, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So after the Stratton Oakmont case, Ron Wyden, who was then, I think, in the House, and then Chris Cox, who was also in the House, a bipartisan team came together and they were like, this is gonna not be super great for innovation and the internet. And then they came up with the idea, and it was funny because it was part of a much larger bill called the Communications Decency Act. And like most of it was found unconstitutional, and this little bit survived because it was like a good piece of it that made sense and like wasn't wrong. So that survived scrutiny. And it also, I mean, we're so lucky we have that here. And when people go after it, to me, it's like killing the goose that laid the golden egg. I mean, you have all this opportunity to bring people together, to do really great things, from all trails to Wikipedia, to lots of random people's blogs, comment sections, to social media the way it exists today. But it's so funny that it was all because of that case. And then 2 House members who got in the section, and basically like no one was really thinking about it as much as they were about all the other sections. But it's something really great that I think, I know Ron Wyden still loves it, but it's so funny to think like this little bit is such a big part of the internet today.
How is it possible that I don't think we see that sort of legislation very often. Maybe this is my bias, right? But I feel like most of the legislation we see is doing the opposite. Is trying to restrict all this stuff. So how did that? I mean, what came over these to have them actually be in favor of innovation, and so was it as benign as what you're describing, or were there other motives behind this?
I think that was just a big part of it. They were both tech nerds and they care about innovation, and you will find that, but you don't find it as much as I wish you would find it. Ron Wyden is still interested in this. I mean, he drives me nuts on Supreme Court stuff and on taxes, but he really is, he's trying to do his job well. He really is, no matter how much I disagree with him on other stuff. He's really there to help people innovate, and that's something I've always really respected about him. I mean, I'm sure he does stuff seeking attention here and there too, like maybe with the Supreme Court stuff, but he's a more serious legislator than you really see a lot of times. And I mean, I know the institutions in Congress and Senate have gotten worse, but it's kind of sad when you don't see this kind of stuff pop up more and more really critical thinking of what's going to help foster good stuff. You do see it in the state houses a little bit more, I think, from time to time, but it's just so cool to me that they got together and were like, oh, this is a problem. That's going to mean if you try to keep users safe, you're sued for every time you fail. Like, that's crazy to me, and it was crazy to them, and they took care of it, and they have this amazing legacy from it. But it was just some good legislators getting together and doing stuff together, and I'd love to see that more.
And did Section 230 create a precedent for other countries? Did they follow suit in similar legislation, or did they do other things?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to sue people in other countries and sue places where people post stuff in other countries. It's just it's funny. There's some books on it you can read where it really goes into history of lawsuits in other countries, which I know I'm a dork, but I actually really enjoy seeing how lawsuits play out in other countries. I was just getting into this with another area, and I'm like, whoa, here the government will protect you if you're a search and rescue worker and you mess up, but in a reasonable way. Well, in Canada that happened, and the government was like, we're out, your problem. And it was just kind of jarring to me to see that, because in the US, I'm used to the government, if you're helping out the government, they kind of protect you. Just interesting stuff when you can watch it in other countries, but we're spoiled here with how stuff works.
Yeah. So following up to that, as Josh was saying, do you feel like in regards to Twitter, now X, and Elon's purchase of it, takeover of it, do you feel like he's improved it, like he's moved it in a positive direction by opening it up more than it had been under previous administration there? Or do you feel like he's brought it in the wrong direction? I'm now more of a Substack reader, so I'm just like let Twitter be Twitter, let X be X. But I'm curious what your take is on it.
Yeah, I thought he would do better than he has. And some things I think have just changed over time. Like you're seeing people get canceled less. And I think too many people are attributing that to Elon. Well, I attribute it to increased levels of shamelessness. Just like you started to see, and it's not just Trump. I mean, it's lots of elected officials who do insane things and then sort of get canceled and pop right back. And that was something that I was always a little bit concerned about with the Me Too movement. Because while I think they did a lot of good stuff, I think sometimes they just didn't really have a plan for what happens after this person's canceled. And it turns out that they just pop right back up. So I think shamelessness in our culture has gotten us to where some bad figures just kind of pop right back and just continue onward. And I've noticed that more. And I think people see canceling as a little more futile. And I think some people attribute that maybe rightly in part to Elon, but I think it's a much bigger thing there. I don't like how he goes so personal against his enemies. It's just kind of childish, like whether it's Substack or whatever, like how he's like suppressing Substack links, which is sad because I started 14ers and fibromyalgia Substack. It's as fun as it sounds, but now I can't like really post the link. I just post screenshots. And then he's driven a lot of liberals away, and I actually miss a lot of them because some of them were really smart and different than me. And I liked having their opinion there, and now they're at Blue Sky, which I also don't really like that much.
Yeah,
it has
right.
its own problems, some of which are mirrors. So I think he's gone back and forth. One thing that I really don't like that he's done is he doesn't fight governments on censorship and requests for user info. He talks a big game about it, but he doesn't really like if you look at the numbers, former Twitter administrations were much harder against that stuff than he's been. He's louder when he is, but that's not always helpful, and I kind of wish the old Twitter administration was doing more of that. So for me, it's mixed, and I think a bit mediocre, but I'm surprised Twitter's been around as long as it has, not even just because of Elon, but just because I kind of thought that it would have died or something else would have popped up, and it just seems like no one else kind of knows what to do, so I'm very mixed. Some good stuff, some bad stuff,
Yeah, one of the things that I've been wrestling with, no, actually, just to add to some context to that, because like the Brazil example is a great one. Like there was all this bluster about how he was going to fight censorship, and then at the last minute he just kind of complied with everything that the Brazilian government asked for. And then at the same time, like this happened with Erdogan in Turkey, like he just complied without ever really even making a public case about it. So there's all this weird stuff happening. The one thing that I've been wrestling with, Shoshana, this is the bigger question that I don't have an answer to, that I wanted to talk to you about and just kind of like rest with, as somebody who's spent as much time thinking about the regulatory environment around this, is, as you mentioned, Twitter is effectively like, it's become in some ways an established institution in American life. It's an institution. It's a private company, right? People voluntarily choose to agree with it or not, or you choose to use it. But because it's reached this critical mass of users, almost every organization that's kind of popped in to try to offset it has failed. Like Blue Sky has not really reached critical mass. Threads, as many users as they have, their user levels are completely low compared relative to Twitter. And it serves as a pretty important fixture in the American political conversation. There's a lot of conversations that happen there. Now, Elon is, at least from my perspective, seemingly maliciously using the algorithm and his massive platform to basically boost complete misinformation and lies. Like I saw Alex Novrasser from the Cato Institute talk about something that he was boosting yesterday, which was just completely full of falsehoods. And so as a liberal, and a liberal in the true liberal sense, right? The way that, like a classical liberal, I think that we should absolutely trust markets over government intervention. We should rely on private sector solutions to this problem. But I look at the situation with Twitter, and I see somebody who is controlling that platform and using it to spread really false narratives, damaging narratives, things that have resulted in death threats towards people and things like that. And I don't know how to solve that, whether through the market, and I definitely don't think the way to solve that is by like tearing down Section 230. But I just wanted to like ask you a broad question about that, because that's the big conversation people are asking now, is how do we deal with this kind of dynamic with Twitter? Do we need to combat it? Like, what are your thoughts on that broad challenge?
So Elon's also just one of these guys that people want to brown nose really hard, and like it's that desire, I think, more than the algorithm that results in the death threats. That like someone's like, oh, you were mean to my guy Elon, like go to hell and like whatever. I think it's more about that than the algorithm. Like I mean, you guys know, but technology is a tool and whatever, but like, it's about trusting the account. It's not even about the reach. It's like, if some random person says something random against a random person you don't know, it's not going to really interest you. But if you're obsessed with Elon Musk, and he says something and it like riles you up, that's different. And I think it's way more about him personally than it is about the platform, because he could use TV to do it. He could like have his own services or newsletters, whatever he wants to do. And I think people just get really into his cult of personality, and I think it's just way more about that. Even when you see it on a smaller scale or with other people, you tend to see it's just everyone loves some guy, and if that guy is like pissed off at someone, then they'll all go and be pissed off at them. Even back to the leave Britney alone days, like it's kind of funny to see, but like it really is a similar kind of dynamic there. And regulation wouldn't solve it. I mean, like if Elon couldn't own Twitter anymore and like got kicked off and had to sell it, whatever it was, then he'd just like go somewhere else and do the same stuff, and then regulation wouldn't apply to him, but he'd still be doing it. And I think that tends to be just the case, that it's about the cults and stuff like that. And death threats, unfortunately, were always pretty common before Elon too. It's just anger and weird vibes take new methods and means and stuff like that, But it is a good question, because I think like that stuff scares people, and rightfully so. It's not good stuff, and I think it's something we need to solve for. But I also think people need to like grow up a little bit. Not you guys. I mean, like the death threat people need to grow up a little bit and like get lives, and maybe that ties a little bit more into the like men falling out of society than it does like Twitter regulation.
Yeah. No, the thing that seems to me, and this is again a little anecdotal, but there was an article about how, and again, this is also I think an anecdote. It's hard to prove this because it's all obscure, about how Elon, when he took it over, his team wrote a piece of code that like boosted everything he did in the algorithm. I just created it.
Funny.
I just created a Twitter account, and like the first thing that pops up is you need to follow Elon Musk, and then there's all these MAGA red pilled accounts. So it seems to me like, the same criticism that the people before Elon took it over about how maybe Twitter was kind of utilized as a tool to like boost blue-pilled narratives has basically just been flipped on its head, and now we're seeing the opposite happen, and Elon's kind of boosting red-pilled narratives and all these other things. So I don't have a solution to it either, and it's very difficult to navigate this, because as soon as you give it control to the state, for example, I mean, who's the arbiter of truth, right? Like that's the real question. So should we let private actors? I don't have a solution. I'm curious, Max, if you've got any other thoughts on that before we.
Yeah, my solution is stop using Twitter. That's my solution. I spend little time on it these days. Substack is now far more interesting.
Okay. Well, why don't we talk about AI a little bit, Shoshana, before we run out of time? Because I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about this too, Max. I know you had some broad thoughts on this.
Yeah. AI regulation, legislation, it falls on a bunch of different, it falls on AI in a bunch of different ways. So one of the ones we can kick off talking about is one that I haven't heard about as much lately, but it's, I think you remember, it's probably about a year or two ago now, but they were talking about the AI pause. Everybody was saying that things are moving too fast. Soon these AI are going to turn into paperclip maximizers, and we're all going to be, they're going to turn us all into some sort of gray goo matter, et cetera, when they become super intelligent and take over the world and all of this. So it's going too quickly. We're going to lose control. We need to stop this now. I haven't heard as much about that lately. In fact, I read, I think it was this morning, that Gavin Newsom had just vetoed some legislation in California stopping some of this stuff. But so before talking about the occupational issues and the IP issues, how do you see the kind of overall negativity or fears around runaway AI superintelligence explosions? Like, is that calmed down a lot in the past year or so, or is it still strong?
Was it like a year or two ago, all the godfathers of AI, because apparently there's like 14 of them who claim themselves to be AI godfathers, and I'm like, that kid must be like rich or something. I don't know, but like I don't know who wants to be a godfather that bad. Yeah. But they gave it 6 months before like AI caused catastrophes, and it just never happened, and then they kind of shut up, and now they kind of whine about it, which is just incredible. But yeah, it's like technology scares people, and I hope to just never be one of those people. Like, I hope when I'm 80 and like whatever is happening, I hope I'm like cool with it, and or I'm like, I'm not sure I get it, but like, sure, let's innovate. It's just childish, and it's like, I was actually talking to someone recently who was saying AI better not steal my job. They didn't have a job because they're not working to get a job, and I'm like, yeah, it's not why you don't have a job. It's because you're like, you don't want to work. These are different things. And I think like, I mean, AI is improving my job in a lot of random ways. Like, I can't code. I suck at code. I try really hard and I'm bad at all languages, all kinds of languages. But now I have AI write Python for me. And this isn't something our street would have paid for otherwise. Like, we don't have the budget for that stuff. But can we like budget like a small budget for like ChatGPT and I can play around and get the code I need? Yeah, like it cuts off like thousands and thousands of dollars of costs and trial and error. And we've actually paid for someone to code for us before, and then it broke soon after because stuff changes with different programs. But now it's like 5 minutes and I'm just like, no, write it like this, fix it like this, and then it works and it's incredible. But this isn't replacing stuff. This is adding on. And you're really starting to see that in a lot of areas. Even like, I think there was something the other day that like fast food places are trying to use it to like take load off of staff so that way they can think through stuff and improve the places. And then AI can handle the other stuff. Like, that's really cool to me. And I think
I saw that article.
Yeah.
I saw that article, and I wanted to like underscore that because I think that's a really, and I didn't mean to derail you, but like the idea that I think the article that you were referencing was talking about how everyone thought that when they did automation, it was going to remove jobs. But what it's done is it introduced, like with McDonald's, for example, table service, because now they're not using the people for the front, and the quality and the speed is improved, so they can do more digital deliveries. And in reality, it's just increased efficiency. The jobs have stayed the same. And nobody could have foreseen that. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think that was a crazy, mind-blowing article to read. I thought it was very interesting.
I love that kind of stuff. I see it in my own job. I see it in other people's jobs. Like, think tanks don't usually have very big budgets in a lot of cases. So we have to figure out, okay, or at least big for what we want to do. So then we can add in new stuff using AI. Like, most of it's personal automation, actually, just like doing my job for me in certain ways, so that way I can add on other stuff. And it's not cost us to fire anyone. I'm like, oh, great, now I can stop employee burnout, because most of what I'm automating was really, really tedious. And I think you're going to see that in a lot of professions, like expense reports, spreadsheets, when you're looking at it and you're like, I don't know what I'm looking at anymore. And then another AI can come in and say, like, okay, here's stuff that you might not have noticed here. Like, I love that kind of stuff. So I'm excited about it, but it's just incredible to me how many people are so pessimistic about the future when AI is also like helping with cancer, and maybe it has solved diabetes and like all these incredible things, or like it's a great double check on like medical tests, like various body scans, or it can catch cancer really early. Like, that stuff is really cool. But then it has downsides too that people are learning. Like, I read about how I think for what is it, for skin cancer, if there's a ruler in the photo, it thinks it's skin cancer because like if you have skin cancer, there's a ruler in the photo to measure it. But like, to me, it's just amazing that we're making these strides, and that, you know, if there's not a ruler in the photo, you can get an accurate reading. I don't know, I'm so pumped about it, and it's crazy to me that all people can think of is, no, not change. It's like, oh yeah, society hasn't changed at all in the last like 100 years. It's strange, and it's a sad way of thinking to me too, you know?
Yeah.
Do you think? Go ahead, Josh.
No. I was just going to agree with that. I think that is a very important thing, to be hopeful about the future, and not, because again, it seems like extremists on the far left and the far right are both united in this like idea that we need to like stagnate things. They've got different motivations, but I couldn't agree more. It's very important to be dynamic and be excited about this. Go for it, Max.
I was gonna say, yeah, this idea that new forms of automation are gonna result in nobody having any jobs, and this is probably going back to like the time of the invention of the wheel or whatever. Now you don't need as much people to push you along the ground. I don't know, something, right? So this has been around for forever. It's a very old story, and AI is just the latest instantiation of that same tired old story. But how do you feel like this applies to anybody in the intellectual property field, right? So like if somebody makes music and then there's a model that is trained on creating music and has been trained on millions of songs made by millions of different people, and now some piece of music comes out and one of the original artists finds out that they were used as training data and then sues the AI company that's producing the new piece of music. Do you feel, and that could of course apply to movies, music, photos, books, right? So you were talking about cancer research. What if the AI is trained on a bunch of cancer information in textbooks and in articles and places, and then produces a piece of information that clearly it must have had some knowledge of some particular paper that was written with, and then it regurgitates that in some fashion, and then there's a bunch of lawsuits because, you know, the OpenAI didn't pay the specific one. So how do you see all that playing out in the coming years?
So I'm not even fully sure where I stand on some of it, just because I get IP, I understand how intellectual property law works, but I don't agree with a lot of it. And I think a lot of it was like crappily made and a bit short-sighted. And I'm not sure how I end up kind of seeing some of it, but there's theories out there. Like, you have this extreme theory. I have a friend who's into this, that like intellectual property shouldn't exist and you should just be able to do whatever. Sure, that's where we go. I'm open, but I'm not totally sure. And there's also this theory that like AI is basically the mind learning, that it's digital learning, like it's a robot learning. So just like if you read a paper and learn and regurgitate, like no one's going to be like, oh, how dare he? And it's the same thing with like all kinds of AI. But then there's other people that are like, no, if it ever learned from anything, you should be paid for it. But I kind of look at that like Python. There's Python all over the web, everywhere on the internet. So like, how do you do that, and how do you like do that without stopping innovation, just practically? So I'm not sure where it'll go. I don't think a lot of people are decided either, because a lot of the loudest advocates for for paying everyone for everything that they ever produce that ever goes into an AI system, they're just not really making practical arguments. I'm not sure the other side is quite either. So I think there's a bit of a standstill until we figure out how we want to see it. And I also think that just IP is just such a convoluted area with a lot of very like understandable gripes on different sides, like from drug stuff, like how different drugs maintain patents and extend them long after to make sure that they can just keep the patent. Well, that same drug is like $5 in another country. Well, it's like $1,000 here. So for me, I think it's like we kind of have to figure out our other patent and IP issues before we can approach this one. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that would be the smart way for it to happen, and that there needs to be some rethinking here. But I don't think that'll happen. I don't know what's going to happen with it. But it's such an interesting area that I think there needs to be more thought on that doesn't just conform to priors. I've read a lot about it, and I'm still not quite sure. And I think it would be better if some people said they weren't sure instead of saying some crazy stuff, but that's not
Yeah.
you know.
So I say it's kind of a little bit scary, because it feels like we're in the most unserious moment when it comes to the way that our lawmakers approach
Oh, I know.
lawmaking now, right? And we're dealing with
Especially on tech.
yeah,
Yeah.
and we're dealing with probably the biggest technological advancement that we've seen since at least the internet, right? Maybe, and it's maybe even more prone, it may be even more significant than that. So
Some people would argue ever, right? Some
Yep,
people
yeah.
would say this is the biggest revolution we're ever going to see.
I think it absolutely could be, and having such a group of unserious lawmakers right now in this moment is a very concerning prospect. As you say, there's still great people that do great work, but a lot of times you don't even know who they are, right? The ones that are dominating the conversation don't seem to be incredibly serious. I want to talk a bit about fake news, because we talked a little bit about this. I'll just give you an anecdote. One of the things that has blown me away is I've played with these tools that allow you to basically synthesize voices. So, you could run my voice. I've done this before, just playing around with friends of mine who have do live streaming and things. You could run 4 hours of live stream video through this thing, and it could emulate your voice, right?
Love that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. I actually made a chat battle of my buddy, and it's hilarious, because now we play video games, and I'll play his own voice back to him. I got him to say some crazy copy pasta the other day. But yeah, so the tech has progressed in a very, very insane to an insane place. Now, they just rolled out advanced voice with GPT. I don't know if you've played with this at all, Shoshana. But
No, I haven't.
it is... Okay, so if you're paying for GPT and you use the mobile device, they rolled this out 3 days ago. It's the very conversational, it responds in real time. It's very kind of creepy, because you can have a conversation with it and there's no lag. It's immediate back and forth conversation. It'll laugh, it'll take breaths. It sounds like a person.
Oh, that's
So-
creepy. I hate that.
Yeah, and so one of the things that actually happened with this product was it had a bug early on in the testing phase, and the beta testers caught this, where it would actually sometimes find itself emulating your voice back to you. So at one point it was talking to the bot, and the bot started talking to the person as though it was the person. So it started using the same voice inflections and it emulated its voice. And I promise you I'm going somewhere with this. I think about anecdotes, which I've read articles about these, about how bad actors could say, call your school and emulate your voice to pick up your kids, or call your wife and emulate your voice to have a conversation to get some social security number, things like that. And so I do think that the threat, especially when you think about all these different technological products that could be connected to each other, how they could result in some very damaging, very destructive things. So this touches on just kind of the risk of AI broadly, but I mean, it could also, with video and photos, turn into fake news and misinformation. So I'm curious as to like, how do you feel like we should tackle, or how should lawmakers tackle this, or are you concerned about it? Just what are your broad thoughts on that concern about
So
AI?
it's really funny. I like don't do this intentionally, but a lot of the stuff I do ends up going back to LifeLock commercials. So like when I'm in the West, I wake up really early, and that means LifeLock commercials are on. And also there's this like steam cleaner that also gets a lot of airtime at like 3 a.m. in the West and stuff. But LifeLock commercials make a lot of really good points that I ended up realizing, am I just like copying them my scholarship? But not only do they like do stuff that relates to my age verification work and the problems there, but they have someone on it like call the spouse with like an AI voice and like ask for a social, and she gives the social, and she's not like a stupid person. It's just, she's like, we've been married for so long, how do you not know my social security number? That stuff scares the crap out of me, where the problem's at. But so there's a couple of problems there that even before you get to AI that we can address. One is that a lot of the bad actors are in other countries where our laws don't apply because like the government won't go after them. So like China has like a compound of people who work in crypto scams who are slaves, and like I'll mess with scammers, but I will not mess with crypto scammers because like I don't want to electrocute like innocent slaves. Like that's really bad. But then there's other countries too where it's either hard to catch them and the governments don't have the resources, or there's other reasons we really can't go after them. But it tends to be like governments who just don't like us or don't care about the problems we have. So when they're coming from there, our regulation doesn't matter at all. Like it won't matter whatsoever for those people. So that's one part of the issue. And two is that all platforms, I think, have done really bad with alerting people to potential scams. I was talking to people from a group of companies that are looking at figuring out how to do that better, how to alert someone, hey, you might be talking to a scammer, figuring out that. And I think that is going to be really important, reminding them that, like, it's easy to spoof phone numbers. It's easy to use AI to emulate voices. Like, we have to do that now. And that has to be companies. Like, the government isn't going to really help a ton there. Companies have to figure out with their own data, here's where it's happening, here's the groups it's happening to, the time it's happening, and they have that data, and I think they really need to do better with it. Everyone from like Verizon and texting to like Snapchat, just everywhere. It has to be done everywhere, and showing them best practices on how to communicate sensitive information and when not to trust it and stuff like that, because there's just no other way to do it, because people in other countries are just going to be able to do this all the time. I think that's also a bit of the reason that the FTC doesn't really pursue scammers as much as you would expect them to, because they really can't. They don't have the authority, so it's better to just stop them rather than go after them, like make people aware of the scam rather than go after them. So all those problems happen before you really even get to the AI voice thing, because those people have been doing it forever, and these are common things that people are still falling for. The AI voice thing is worse, and I think it's going to catch more people off guard. I mean, regulation can only go so far here, because it's just like this stuff is already illegal here to do that stuff. Like those actions are already illegal. Making it more illegal isn't going to help. Like if you pass a law saying it's illegal to emulate someone's voice for purposes of defrauding them, well, fraud's already illegal, so we're already there. The laws already apply. It's just harder because if it happens in other countries, we can't go after them. VPNs are great privacy protection tools, but it also can make it easier for criminals to do stuff. And I'm all for VPNs, but it's just, it's a new, we need to figure out new ways for the government to go after stuff, and also just to alert people. So if they don't fall for the scams, demand falls and the stuff will happen less. So it's a really complex thing where I wouldn't be opposed to government regulation if it would solve something. But we've done all we can do here as far as the regulatory side, that we have to work on the proactive stopping the stuff side and making sure that kids know about this stuff too. Like I'm big in like basic cyber stuff should be taught in schools, just really basic principles, and teach them examples of how stuff can go wrong. I mean, LifeLock is doing the world a favor with their commercials, but we need more than just great LifeLock commercials teaching us, you know?
Yeah, I was thinking it would be relevant for kids, and that's something that should probably be standard, commonplace in curriculum. But I also think some of the biggest risk is in the elderly.
The elderly.
I don't know
Totally.
if you get on Facebook, but every day I get on Facebook and I see these AI photos that are obviously fake AI photos that have like 100,000 boomer likes
Yeah.
of all these people
Yeah.
sharing
Those were
it.
fascinating when I started learning about how they were engagement farming with like, what
Yeah.
was it? Not egg Jesus, shrimp Jesus, right?
Shrimp Jesus? I don't know if I'm familiar.
Jesus.
Fill me in, please.
I think it was shrimp Jesus, where they're like some poor kid who had access to a lot of shrimp made Jesus out of shrimp, and then grandmas will be like, "Aw," and then like someone will comment in the I know, and someone will comment in the comment section and be like, "Oh, like let me get to know you," and now she trusts that person because they just posted shrimp Jesus, so like then they like build a bond and stuff. But it was AI shrimp Jesus,
Right.
of course, you know. But yeah, like
Yeah.
it's the elderly and young people too who don't know how this stuff works. Those tend to be two big groups for scams too, and identity theft. I think it's that. For identity theft in particular, the elderly lose more money, but the kids lose money more often. So it's smaller amounts, but more often. And when I've been looking through data too, Washington D.C. is a real hotbed because, of course, like if you have bad actors who want access to national security information, start with a kid and like find ways in through there. It's fascinating stuff, but we're so far behind, and AI is the least of our problems because if we could get better on some of this other stuff before then it would just be a new layer of the same challenge instead of a challenge that we're not really addressing, just going even crazier.
I like this point that you made about how the phone companies, for example, should hopefully take some more responsibility for providing that service to their customers in some way that helps them decipher what is scam or what is AI or any of these things versus what's not, especially for the elderly or for kids. But I feel like, for example, Google through Gmail, it feels like they do a better job at this, right? So like, because depending on what the email says, it'll be like, hey, be careful, this looks like spam. And often when I've seen that in message, it is spam. And I can tell, I'm like, yeah, it's spam. Or that's phishing or whatever it is. So I feel like it's certainly easy and possible to do the work, the computational work, to be able to analyze and decipher whether or not an email is this kind of thing. So I think like it should be reasonably expected for either T-Mobile or Verizon or AT&T or one of these to try and offer a similar product for voice and for text messaging.
It's amazing,
At least
too.
through
Lawmakers always go after Google and social media companies for not doing this enough. They do a better job than the phone companies and then a lot of other companies that you kind of think would do better here. And Verizon has like a call filter. I think some of their texts are starting to get there, but the messages aren't as helpful as I wish they would be. Like, I wish they'd be like, if they saw the word social security number or something like that, or SSN, that they'd be like, hey, remember never to text someone this, something like that. Just little simple things and specific messages for the time too that are tailored. And I know it gets into other layers too because phone companies have other legal obligations that this could run into, and I get that. But seeing what, even if they need room, like figuring out what regulators can do to give them room so they can do stuff like that, kick people off. Because I think it's like crazy hard to kick people off, like being able to text and stuff. Like that's not something you can really do, which is weird that you can't do that.
Well, and one of the things I wanted to say before we go to the last point on this is with the risk, to the point about being an embracing of technology innovation, with the risk also comes great opportunity, because with these AI chatbots that can have verbal conversations in real time, I mean, I've seen demos. I saw demos before even GPT came to market of having a assistant in your pocket that can call and make appointments for you or screen your phone calls and save you so much opportunity and also so much risk. But it is an exciting and kind of scary time. Max, did you want? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on one last thing here before we move off the AI subject. But I'm already using, full disclosure, I'm already using AI, ChatGPT, and other sources for kind of simple legal issues that I want to have a clear idea on, or even I've uploaded a contract on something that's not too scary, and something that if anybody else ever saw it, it'd be okay, nothing too dangerous, right? But upload the contract, say evaluate this, on the points of the contract and how it looks legally. But I can imagine that, the American Bar Association or whatever is not too happy that I'm, doing this instead of paying some attorney or some paralegal or something to do the evaluation of whatever the document is. So how do you feel like, especially in a white collar, which seems like where a lot of the threat now is to the white collar, people in white collar positions feel like they're threatened by AI. How do you feel like that's going to result in regulation or some sort of legislation? Do you feel like these forces, whether it's the American Medical Association, the bar, whoever, are gonna be attacking OpenAI and Google and the rest?
Yeah, the American Medical Association doesn't want anyone to have power except doctors. They're terrible that way. The ABA's better. I've actually started talking with their people more, and they're actually pretty open to licensing reform, shockingly so, some of their people, which is really exciting. I think maybe they were their hands were forced after years of terrible, I mean, it wasn't even their fault, but the bar exam mess ups and all that kind of stuff. But they seem pretty open. I don't think they'll be super open to AI. I mean, one thing I loved was, I forget which case it was. I think it was the do not pay case where a lawyer, no, it was actually a different one, where a lawyer came before a judge and said, this wasn't my fault, AI messed up. And he's like, you're the lawyer, you're supposed to review it. And I think that's exactly the standard. Use AI as much as you want, but if you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't be lawyering. That's your job. And when better models come out, I'm sure it's going to be really easy to make contracts in a lot of cases if it's not too complicated. Wills are going to be so much easier. The basic things that everyone needs a little bit of. Plus, legal services are so crazy expensive, and obviously this gets into licensing reform stuff too. But you definitely see a lot of anger from white collar people thinking that they're better than everyone else, and that's why they got into whatever they wanted to do. And I'm that's not the reason to do it. I don't have a license, and AI is automating away parts of my job, and now I can do better, more interesting stuff, and teach my employees how to use AI in the way they want in automation. There's just an incredible universe out there, and there's a lot of people who just want to protect what they have now and not think about all the cool stuff they could do if they had more free time. They'd rather just keep it as is, and it's a sad mindset, because what if we could give a lot of people just so much access to justice? I'm so excited about it for that reason, and access to medical care. I remember using social media to find my diagnoses, because I famously have 13 autoimmune diseases, 4 heavy metal poisonings, and some other stuff. But I kind of wonder, I did a lot of research, and I actually never came across the heavy metal poisonings. And now that I'm going through chelation to get rid of the lead and barium and stuff like that, my body is getting fixed in ways I never thought it would, especially my fibromyalgia. And now you see all these forums for fibromyalgia where people are so did you get tested for lead? And I'm I wonder how much sooner we would have found out if AI was connecting all the information online and saying, hey, you have all this. This tends to go with lead poisoning. Because I kind of found a forum that got me fibromyalgia from endometriosis and getting sick all the time. And that was just me making connections and Googling stuff. But I'm excited to see how AI will do that for me and then bring me hey, have you looked into this? You're having all of these problems. Check this out. It's going to be amazing.
But you say that, but when we put these questions into ChatGPT or such, it already says at the bottom, but consult your doctor to make sure that blah 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 blah. And that's something they're putting in after the fact. But I'm kind of worried that that's right now. But if there's a lot of lawsuits, if there's a lot of problems, it could just be that the moment ChatGPT detects that you're asking anything with an even possibly medical angle, it'll immediately say nope, error. I'm not going to do it. Right, and that's the. A couple
of times with the medical questions, they've kind of shut me down, and I'm no, I want to know what you're thinking. There's this other model out there that's specifically for medical stuff, but it's lacking. So I think someone's going to come up with a better model for this of how to ask questions, how to avoid the liability. Because it's people put medical information online, and this is good. This is stuff I love, because otherwise I would have been many years behind in diagnoses without this. And right now I have a really great doctor, but it took me 40 doctors to get to this one really great doctor, who's of course out of pocket. And I love him, but if I could save that money, that would be really cool.
Well, okay, well then with that, this is a great pivot to the last topic in the last 7 or so minutes that we have you, which is occupational licensing, which again, I know you've spent an incredible amount of time thinking about. This applies to medical, applies to cosmetology. It applies to almost every facet of of the economy. Can you talk to me just for our audience sake, broadly talk about kind of occupational licensing and how it's been applied in ways that might stifle innovation or be barriers to, say, people of lower income getting ahead and actually building a better future for themselves?
I mean, why do you think that there have been so many African hair braiding licenses? Like, that seems like a coincidence. Like, and none of those boards, I think, or almost none of those boards had authority to do that. They were cosmetology boards. Braiding isn't in there. But then they decided, well, we'll regulate that too. And I'm like, sure, that wasn't racist at all at any point or anything. I mean, it even goes back to when you needed like special credentials to run a laundromat, because a lot of Chinese people were running laundromats in California, and they're like, oh no, not Chinese people having businesses and like doing things with their lives. Just you start to see it, especially in the early 90s, it's really popping up. And then, I mean, every state has a doctor license, but you can't really, I mean, you can transfer them more easily than you used to, but like bodies are the same in every state. You shouldn't need to like go through the whole process again when you come here from, come to Washington, D.C. from Alaska, or to Alaska from China. If you have a really good license and if you're pretty much at the same level, maybe a small amount of retraining, but there's so many issues with it. It's funny, one thing I often hear is, oh, you don't want licensing, so who's going to do the inspections? Guess what doesn't really happen? Like, salons don't have a lot of health inspections, so they're full of bacteria that they're not supposed to have. People get infections, like really, really high infection rates in salons, because the regulation that would make more sense, just inspections and checking stuff, is more expensive and more burdensome for the government. So then they put more upfront burdens on people that don't really do anything. When people talk about chemicals in hair, you can't see it right now, but it's purple, and I do it myself, and I don't burn myself. I know how to work with my own hair. This stuff isn't rocket science, but it's stuff that you have to learn to understand how to do it well, and lots of salons don't know how to do it well. And if you get a bad haircut, everyone will hear about it, which is great. Like, that's the market at work. And then nurses are trained to do more than they're usually allowed to, but doctors don't want them to do their full jobs and do it independently, because then that makes doctors less valuable. So you have all this nonsense at every level. From Louisiana finally got rid of most of its florist license, which was a license to arrange flowers, which is ridiculous. But you see these all over, multiple layers of licenses from state level to city level. Contractors often have to have like 7 different licenses, and it just doesn't make any sense. And there's so much room to make it simpler, make it more effective, make it like safer too. Sometimes mandatory registration is going to be a better barrier than requiring a bunch of training that doesn't necessarily make sense. And my favorite example is, the more heavily you license electricians, the more harm occurs, because it prices people out. Like, all right, gonna try these wires myself at home. And then it doesn't go great. Yeah, it's fascinating to see all the different dynamics, but there's so much room for reform here, just letting people move and work, and it's so simple to me. And a lot of lawmakers, thankfully, on all sides are into it, with few exceptions. Like if they're bought off by a lobby, sometimes you'll see that, or if they don't fully like get an issue, or we might disagree in earnest, but a lot of it's nonsense.
And are there like specific states or counties, cities that are kind of leading the charge on fixing a lot of this? Is it like a red state, blue state thing? Who are the champions in this?
Yeah, it's definitely not red state, blue state at all. Blue states and red states both do terribly. When Governor Ducey was governor in Arizona, he loved this issue, so he like pushed through as much as he could. Utah's been doing some really good work here, trying to figure out which immigrants are coming from where and what their professions are, so they can start reform in the places where it's going to impact the most amount of people. A lot of governors are super interested in it. Governor Polis loves licensing reform. Shapiro in Pennsylvania, he needs to do some more, but he's been doing pretty good here. There's so much interest in it across the board, but sometimes lobbies will come out, or they try a reform that's like going after too many industries, so all the lobbies come out and kill something. But there's this more widespread recognition of like, okay, this isn't working, it doesn't make sense, and it's just pricing people out who are really helping here. A lot of interest in letting people work across state lines, and less opposition over time too, because it's working so well. So there's a ton of interest. It's just it's so overwhelming, because there's thousands and thousands of licenses everywhere, and each one says, oh, if you don't license us, people will die. People will be harmed if they're doing art for therapy without a license. And I'm just like, come on, can we not? Our art and music therapy are big new licenses, and you just can't knock them all down. They keep trying.
That's interesting. And what we should probably do, Shoshana, is come back and have a whole dedicated topic just to this, because there's so much nuance that I'd love to dig into that we don't have time for today. But no, I just wanted to say, since we are at time, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and getting our audience a little bit more context on this. This is incredibly important and nuanced work that you have ability to kind of make simple and also make fun and enjoyable. So we appreciate the work that you're doing, and thanks again for joining us. I wanted to ask you, is there anything you want to plug, or if maybe someone wants to follow you, where would they go?
Sure. No, thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. It's the first podcast I've done since hiking season, so it's nice to say some of the stuff out loud again, and not just the marmots. So I'm at rstreet.org for most of my work, and Senator Shoshana on Twitter. You can also add me on LinkedIn. I welcome it because LinkedIn's a growing platform and I'm trying to do more of that. So if you can manage to spell my name, you can find me, which is just a task in itself. But no, I really appreciate you guys having me on.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Shoshana.
And Max, thanks for joining. Thanks for taking the time. If you want to learn more about Project Liberal and join our broad-based movement to unite liberals against authoritarianism, you can learn more at projectliberal.org, get on our mailing list, or become a member at projectliberal.org/member. We appreciate your time, everyone. Have a wonderful day.